Welcome to our session. Great to have you all here. Thanks for showing up and joining us for the session on getting super productive with the all-new Spring Tools 4, released yesterday, the first GA version. So we will show that in action now. My name is Martin. I work for Pivotal in the Tools team, and with me is Alex. He's also from the Tools team at Pivotal, so we work together on all the stuff that we are going to show you. So we are really proud to show you everything in action. And whenever you have questions, feel free to ask questions in between, right? That's totally fine. We usually don't wait until the end to answer questions or so. So feel free to raise your hand in between, and we'll try to catch that. That's great. If something is taking too long, we might kind of defer that to the end of the session or after the session. We are here. I think we're here till, I don't know, tomorrow evening at least, so plenty of time to ask more questions. Okay, so before we start, the usual thing, right? The disclaimer, so don't trust us anything, basically. Everything that we're showing, there are no promises that stuff will show up in commercial products or whatever, but since everything that we are going to show you is available already, no secrets, traded, and everything is open source, so all the stuff that we're going to show you is open source and freely available. Feel free to take a look at that and just go and use it. So our mission is developer tooling. So what we focus on is making you more productive. You as a Spring developer, right? That's our goal. Our mission is we would like to help you to make your life as a Spring app and Spring Boot app developer easier. Save your time, make you more happy, make your life better. Basically, that's our mission. That's why we are here. That's why I stand up every morning and go to work and try to improve this stuff. We also like your feedback. So whenever, I'm sitting there, I'm working on the tooling, I ship the tooling, the release goes out, and I don't hear anything sometimes. So I don't really know, is nobody using the stuff? Everybody's happy? Couldn't even imagine that everybody is totally 100% happy. Sometimes issues come up, that's great, but if you have anything that you're missing, everything that's not good, let us know. So file box, file feature request, whatever. And if something's great, please let us also know. That's also great to hear from time to time if something's really great. Okay, so we are working on that mission for quite some time, and the journey started way back in 2005 when the first version of the Spring IDE came out as extensions for Eclipse. So we worked on that and we improved that, and you might be familiar with the Spring tooling for Eclipse that we worked on over the previous years, what's called Spring IDE or Spring Tool Suite, kind of the most famous item on the Eclipse marketplace, for example. And we improved that over time, shipped new versions, all fine, but the origins of this tooling, the real first version and the basic architecture was designed and implemented way back in 2005 already, and the world looked different that time, right? It was kind of Spring app development based on Spring XML files, Spring XML config files. Can you still imagine that, using Spring XML files, huge XML files and defining your beans and dependencies in there? So maybe someone is still suffering from some legacy projects. So the world has changed, so we thought about maybe we should take a step back and rethink the tooling and rethink what's necessary today when thinking about doing Spring Boot app development and doing great apps, cloud native apps maybe, microservices apps, and so on in your favorite IDE. So landscape has changed. No one is doing Spring XML stuff anymore. The tools that you use, there are more tools coming up, like some people prefer big heavyweight IDEs like Eclipse, IntelliJ, and so on. And that's great. Some people prefer more lightweight editors, like for example VS Code is getting more famous over time. And that's why we thought we should do something new. And that's what we released yesterday after a long period of a public beta, which is the Spring Tools 4, completely rewritten from scratch with Spring Boot in mind and focused on performance and lightweight tools. And since we like to give you choice and offer you some choice, and we would like to make you productive independent of the IDE that you prefer, whether it's Eclipse or VS Code or Atom or whatever. The Spring Tools 4 are now available for Eclipse as a ready-to-use distribution, or for VS Code and for Atom too. So that's great. Under the hood, it's based on some kind of new technology that's got invented by VS Code, but we will not go into the details of how the tooling got implemented. That's not why we're here. You can ask us all the questions afterwards about that. We're happy to talk about that. But we would like to show you the new tools in action and show you how you can be really productive using the new tools. And since I hate to talk about tools, and I love to show tools in action and show you what's going on there, Alex will walk you through some demos and tell you a little story about how to work with applications, especially with Spring Boot applications, using the new tooling. And I will chime in and interrupt him from time to time and talk a little bit more about the backgrounds, about the features that you are going to see, and hope you enjoy that. Again, feel free to ask questions in between. Whenever you have any questions, let us know, raise your hand, enjoy the demo. Alex.
Okay, so let's get STS4 for Eclipse opened. I have it opened right here, so it still has some great STS3 features, such as the great getting started experience, right? So the Spring Starter project wizard is still around, and you could set up your brand new Spring Boot project, pick the starter you like, as well as new boot tool starters for reactive web, for example, still there. The Spring guides are still here as well. There's an import Spring Getting Started content wizard. So you could, well, select a topic in Spring you'd like to learn about. For example, I don't know, reactive REST service, right? Set it up and create it, the project, use it, you know, just to explore and learn how to build reactive web applications, or, you know, use it as a starting point.
So as you can see, there's no need to go to start.spring.io from within your IDE, to leave the IDE, go to the website, download zips, uninstall the zips to a disk, and then go back to the IDE and import stuff. You can do everything right from within the IDE. That's something we already built for STS3. It's still available in STS4 because we think it's so awesome. So we had to put that back into STS4, into Spring Tools 4. And we will focus on the demos on the Eclipse part. But you will see the same features for VS Code and Atom too. If you're interested in VS Code, there's another session on VS Code in maybe in about 2 hours or so, where you can see everything running in VS Code.
You can also import, you know, fully blown demo applications such as Spring Pet Clinic. So that's what we've done. It's in our workspace. We've introduced some artificial problems in that application just for the sake of the demo. So we'll try and troubleshoot and fix this application using STS4. So let's start it up using boot dashboard. It's still there. And try and discover those problems. Once the app is started, we'll open the web UI and discover the problems that are there. Oh. Okay, so the problems are really here. Find owner. If I click it, no results, but there should be results. So we'll try and find out why there are no results. So we should probably start looking at this owner's request mapping. Right, so the first question is, how do we find that request mapping definition in our source code? So in STS4, you do it using the quick Spring symbol navigation feature. It's like open Java type in JDT, so it's invoked with the Command 6 shortcut. You could toggle to just Spring symbols in file if you press Command 6 again. Not too many of them, not very exciting. Let's switch back to the workspace symbols. So it's lots of them, right? It's just not the request mappings, it's beans, it's various Spring annotations and request mappings as well. There is a little hint at the top here that tells you what to type to get, let's say, request mappings. It's @ right? If you type @ plus, you'll get beans only, right? So we can continue searching, let's say, type owner controller, right? And so here's the owner controller bin. If you click on it, if you select it, right, it opens the definition of this owner controller bin, right, which is right at this annotation. You could search, let's say, for all component annotations, right? I'm spelled it. Anyway, so, and you could see all the component annotations in your workspace, and you could see that owner controller that we've just opened is still there for a component search. So that happens because controller is meta-annotated with the component annotation. So any controller is a component, and this meta-inheritance relationship is taken into account in that search. So you could see the this relationship as well in the list entry here.
And I think, so this gives you a really super quick overview about everything that's Spring related in your project. It's just at your fingertip, right? One keystroke, you see everything that's Spring related, and you can just search and narrow it down. And this relationship between the annotations is especially interested if in your company you, for example, define your own annotations. For example, you have you define special services. Like you don't annotate everything with add service, but with add my insurance service, right? But you still would like to get an overview about all your services in your Spring app that you defined. Just go to the dialog, press add service, you type in add service, and it shows up everything that's inferred for or inherited from these add service and annotated with any annotation that inherited from add service. So you get a super quick overview about everything, for example, all the services or all the request mappings or everything that you defined as a configuration in your Spring app. It's really, it gives you really great and super quick overview about everything Spring related. So it became my favorite place to just jump and search for stuff that's Spring related in my project, and it's super fast. It just shows up immediately and quickly. There's no need to go to search and find, and then it shows up a tree and blah, 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 and takes a while and so on. It's just super quick. You can type, it filters the result, and you go there. It's super quick.
You can also search for something that's not annotated, for example, a repository bean, right? Owner repository is well, if we open it, we see there are no annotations, but it's a Spring Data repository bean, and it's recognized by the tooling as well. So let's get back to the problem we had. So we want to open owners endpoint definition. So I type owners, this is it, selected, so here we are, right? So the problem is at this owner search service, find owners returns empty results. So let's find the declaration of this. It's a field, and we can see that the field is being set through this at auto-wired setter. So it's a bean being injected into controller, and it's an interface type, right? There could be potentially be many subclasses of that iOwner search service interface, and the question is which bean, which subtype of iOwner search service is being injected and why, right? So,
and I'm sure you've already faced that question too, right? It's kind of, you start up the app, some Spring Boot magic is kicking in, is wiring everything for you, which is awesome, but you find out that something is going wrong, or where does this bean is coming from, or why is that bean injected here and not the other one? So I faced that question many times.
Okay, so the dynamic information about your live beans in your application is available in the IDE. It's mapped right onto your source code from the live running application. So it's usually enabled by default. I disabled it by, well, by switching off the preference. So let's switch it back on. So it's live boot hint decorators. Let's apply it. And once we apply it, you'll see those green boxes around mainly your annotations. So annotations are usually the places where your beans are injected or defined. So if you hover on that green highlight, you'll get the information about the bean that's being either auto-wired at the location or being defined. So for example, if we hover at this auto-wired annotation, right, we can see that the bean empty owner search service is the one being wired in, right? And if you see the detailed information, it tells you what exactly is being wired in and why it's being wired in from the resource, right? So the type tells you what's being wired, and the resource tells you why it's being wired. So it will take you to the place where this bean is defined, right? So let's explore a bit this feature. So we looked at the place where beans are being injected, right? There is also a place where beans are defined. So that shows you a list of where this bean is being injected into the list of other beans where it's injected. So for the controller, there is nothing it's injected into because it's just a controller. It lives in your application context. But it shows here the beans that are being injected into the controller, which is owner repository and empty owner search service. And there is more detailed info about them. So if you find it still annoying to hover on the highlights to get some information, you can enable code lens. So the code lens is another preference. Highlight code lens. So that's the preference we want to turn on. And now you see the code lenses, right? It's really like a short summary of what's going to be on the hover.
So this, to be clear about this, right? There's a clear distinction between these two things that we're showing you, right? One is you navigate to these symbols, you navigate to the annotations. That is looking at your source code, looking at what is in your project. Now we put a totally new dimension on the source code, a totally different thing, which is coming from the real running application. So what's going on at runtime, and overlay that to your source code to provide you direct information and map that direct information to your source code. So you can see both in one place with these code lenses and the hovers. You can see real live app information, what's going on, directly mapped to your source code. It's kind of like a second dimension put on top of the source code.
Okay, so we see that two beans are being auto-wired on the controller, owner repository empty owner search service. So we saw where the empty owner search service is being auto-wired, but now we see where the owner repository is being wired in, and there is no annotation, right? And it's being auto-wired because a constructor in the component, its arguments are implicitly auto-wired beans, so the tooling recognizes that as well. So let's get back to the problem we had. So we're having this empty owner search service being auto-wired. So if we look at its type, it's kind of self-explanatory, just always returns an empty list, very boring. So we should see why this bean is in our application context. So once we navigate to the resource, that should help us, right? So add bean annotation is where it's being defined. So we could see finally an example where beans are being auto-wired and injected into. So we know this bean is injected into owner controller, and it has owner repository injected into this bean.
Can you show the hover quickly again?
Yeah. Right, so we see the arrows, right? So arrow right means injected into beans, and arrow left means, well, beans being auto-wired in this bean. So we can see that empty owner search service is returned if properties is search as false, right? So if it was true, we would have returned owner search service that takes a repository that's being wired in, so that's a good thing. That's what we should be returning here, right? So let's see why properties is search is false. It's false because, well, we first of all see that properties is an auto-wired bean, so let's navigate to probably the type of that bean and see why search is false. So we see that this is a configuration properties bean defining pet clinic owner's search property, which by default is false. So it's externalized in the application properties or YAML file. So I bet this property is either false in the YAML or simply not being set. So let's open the YAML file. Here it is, application YAML. So this property is not defined, so let's set its value to true and hope for the better.
Did you see what showed up?
Oh.
Content assist. Content assist for property files, showing you all the properties that are defined for your Spring Boot app. So no need anymore to go to the web, search documentation, use Google, whatever, to find out is there properties and no property, what type is the property, what is it called exactly, and what do I have to put in there? It's right at your fingertip, right? In the editor, it shows you content assist and help for everything. Help for stuff like what's the type that you need to put in, some kind of explanation, some kind of description of what this property is all about. And even if you define your own properties using the configuration properties annotation, even those properties show up here, as long as you have the annotation processor on the Maven dependencies, the Spring Boot one, right? So all that directly here in the editor, it saves me a lot of time. I don't need to look anything up anymore. It's just directly available for all the properties. It's great help for me.
All right, so we set that property to true. Let's save the file. I have DevTools on my project, so it should automatically reload it. let's go back to owner controller. You see the green markers disappeared because the app is being restarted. Now they reappeared. The app is started and live beans are available. And now I see that owner search service is being auto-wired instead of empty owner search service. So that's a good sign. So we should try and see if we actually fix the problem. So let's go to our owner's request mapping definition. So over request mapping, we also have this green highlight, right? And it shows the live URLs for this request mapping, right? So if we click on it, it will open it in the browser. So that ideally should be searching for the owners. It just takes a while, which is problem number 2, right? So the results probably takes some time to search for owners, right? And they all return in a bulk collection, right? So let's try and see why that happens. So we know that it's owner search service being injected. So let's explore owner search service class, the type of that bean, right? And we can see that we're blocking flux, right? So if we return the flux, it would have been better because the results would come one after another as they become available, right? So to be able to switch to flux and return it from the request mapping handler, we should really be switching. Well, we should be swapping really the web starter for the reactive web starter. So let's.
Okay, and while Alex is quickly changing the stuff to reactive web, online, live in the next. Alex, you get 3 minutes from my side. As you have seen, the live hovers, the stuff that shows you the live information from the app, is not just limited to these bean wiring informations. That's one of the, I think, one of the most important information that we show up, like which beans are active, which beans are not active, which beans are wired into each other. We also provide additional information, like the request mappings, for example. So whenever you have this request mapping defined, the live hover shows up saying, yeah, this request mapping is active, is available in your running app, and you can just click on it. So no need to open a browser and type in the URL localhost and find the port and type in the path and things like that. You can just click on that. Even with the code that's showing up above the annotation, you can directly click on that and it opens up a browser. It's one more piece in the code, in the tooling, where we show additional information right at your fingertip inside of the source code. Oh, there's a question. Awesome. Yeah. Okay, the question is whether all the stuff that we're showing with the live hover information basically is not limited to request mapping, all the bean wirings or whatever. Is it working only if I start up things from the boot dashboard or also if I have stuff running in an embedded Tomcat or whatever? You can configure stuff manually if you want to. We are communicating and finding these apps using JMX stuff and talking to the actuators, to the Spring Boot actuators in the app. So the actuators have to be on the class path of the project. As long as they are there and the process is activated with JMX, we can find it. I must admit that I think we haven't really tested the case of running a Tomcat and deploying the app into the Tomcat, so maybe something is not working out of the box, but in that case, let us know. We are really happy to fix that because it's really built for working with all the different environments, of course. Another question, yeah? Yes, thank you for the question. The question was basically, is this stuff also available in IntelliJ, right? And the short answer is no, but there's also a long answer. The short answer is no, because the stuff that we build, so our goal is not to compete with other IDEs, right? My goal is to, whatever IDE you prefer to use, and that's kind of a very kind of personal choice, I think, you should continue to use. My goal is to give you the best Spring tooling available for that tooling that you choose. IntelliJ already comes with out-of-the-box Spring tooling, which is awesome. And I think some of those features are already kind of showing up slowly in IntelliJ, but we haven't built our stuff for IntelliJ because we are using the language server protocol, some kind of a new mechanism to extract language tooling and framework tooling into separate things. And that is not supported yet by IntelliJ. That's the main reason why you cannot just take that and put that into IntelliJ, which we can do with Eclipse and VS Code and Atom. It's just, that makes it very easy. We don't have to rewrite everything for VS Code and for Atom. So if there is LSP or language server support showing up in IntelliJ in the future sometime, we would be happy to put the stuff in there too. But I'm sure the IntelliJ guys, since they're doing awesome Spring tooling, they will also pick up great features and great ideas from this part maybe and implement that in IntelliJ too, which would be great, right? So I'm not worried about IntelliJ missing those features in the future. I'm sure they will do something like that too. Yeah, definitely. And the question actually, it comes up many times, so thanks for that. And one thing I would like to mention is, if you have watched Alex working on the code, you might have seen that he is not really using the Package Explorer anymore, and he is not really using OpenType anymore. He is really using a lot of the hovers and using the navigation in the hovers to jump from bean to bean to bean. It's a really interesting observation. It changes your behavior as a developer. It makes it a lot easier to go from one bean to the other bean to the next bean to the next bean using this live information. Really cool. Okay, so Webflux is done, I guess.
Yeah, so
awesome.
You could see the effects of Flux here, right? So entries show up as they become available, right? So that's the beauty of reactive web and reactor project Flux and everything. So that's it. So we could also, as a side, since we switched to reactive web, it puts Webflux framework on the class pass, and we can convert some of the MVC style request mappings into functional style request mappings. So I have this work started here. We can just uncomment the handlers for the request and for the functional request mappings. Take care of the imports. Yes. And this is the router part. Let's uncomment that as well. Take care of the imports. Yes. Okay. Save that. And if we switch to the, so this is the usual pattern, right? The common pattern, have a router function in one class and the handler in another. So if you're looking at the handler, right, the handler is kind of a little disconnected from what the request mapping is defining. So STS4 helps you a bit, right? It puts this code lens such that you know which request mapping is being handled by the handler. Right?
Yeah, it's one additional piece where we think it makes sense to enrich your code a little bit with the static information that we parsed from the code. So this is again nothing that comes from the live app. This is just from looking at your code. You define something as using the reactive web stuff, and I really would like to know, when I take a look at the handler function, I would really like to know what this handler function is really mapped to. So what's the URL? And maybe in the future we can even click on that, and if there's a live app, jump to that directly from here to give you the direct information. So I think we're coming close to the end already. So I would like to mention a few additional things. Maybe you can jump back to the slides.
Oh yeah.
Again, the reactive web stuff could also be defined in a programmatic style using lambda definitions and kind of a functional style to hack up your stuff. And our navigation is smart enough to parse that too. So whenever you go to, you would like to get the quick overview about the request mappings, for example, in your app, like go to symbol, add /, it not only shows up the add request mapping or add get mapping things that you defined in your code, but if you functionally implemented the routes using the Webflux stuff, they will show up in the same way. Because we're coming from a Spring team, right? We know how Spring works, so we can put the smarts into the tooling for that. And the other thing that I think is this live information from running apps is, I think it's a real awesome, great value add to the tooling that opens up a totally new dimension of how to look at your code, how to look at your Spring Boot apps. Because it kind of bridges the gap between the running app and what happens, what does all the Spring Boot magic does at runtime with how does my source code look like? It's even smart enough to say, if you're running, for example, the same app multiple times on your machine, like, oh, I start up my app with that profile enabled and another time with the other profile enabled. I have 2 apps running. It shows you the information from both apps. So you see the live hover from both live running processes, so you can even compare them. You can even see, oh, in process 1, this bean gets wired. In process 2, the other bean gets wired. Really nice. And because we think this is not the end, we can even go one step further and help you with remote apps. So if you deploy your app on Cloud Foundry, for example, onto the cloud platform, and something happens over there and you're not really sure what goes on at runtime on your cloud platform, and you deploy that, for example, using the boot dashboard, and you can configure that manually, it goes back to the other question, it will show up the exact same information from your app running on Cloud Foundry. You see all the bean wirings, all the live hovers, the request mappings, whatever, everything that's running for your app on Cloud Foundry also directly mapped to your source code, which I think is great. And you can even compare them if you have another version of that running locally, right? So that's awesome. We're coming close to the end, so next slide. I would like to answer the questions right after that, if that's okay, because I'm not sure how long the break is, or if someone else will show up to give the next talk. So give you a quick outlook. Spring Tools 4 is going to be, it went GA yesterday. We will continue to update that. If you prefer to use the old version, we'll still receive kind of maintenance updates, but it will reach its end of life next year, mid of next year, so be prepared to jump over to the new one. I can highly recommend that, of course. If you want to know more or want to see the stuff running in VS Code, join the talk later today. Give you a bunch of demos in running Java stuff and hacking Java stuff in VS Code. And if you have any questions, feel free to come up to us here afterwards. And I would like to thank you. I hope you enjoyed the session, and thanks for coming. Thanks.